He only stepped on stage because his daughter begged him to. Everyone thought it would be a joke until a single voice silenced the room and brought a secret billionaire to tears. What happened next wasn't just unexpected. It was the kind of moment that changes lives. If stories like this move you, inspire you, or simply make your heart a little fuller, don't forget to subscribe. There's always more where this came from. Now, let me tell you what really happened that night. Mason Rivers wiped the last smear of grease from his hands with an old red rag and tossed it onto the workbench beside the busted alternator. Outside the garage bay, the sun was settling low behind the pines, casting long shadows over the gravel lot. The scent of motor oil rust and fresh-cut wood lingered in the air, familiar grounding. Dad Ellie's voice rang out light and excited as she ran into the garage, her backpack bouncing with each step. She was 7, all freckles and fire, with her late mother's copper-brown hair and Mason's steel-gray eyes. He smiled despite his exhaustion. "Hey, Bug, how was school?" She bounced in place, clearly bursting with something. "Guess what? I signed you up for something," Mason chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Didn't we talk about surprises last week?" "This is a good one," she insisted, thrusting a wrinkled flyer into his hand. Across the top in bold blue letters read, "Willow Creek Elementary Talent Show, Friday night." He froze. "Ellie, I put your name down. You're singing Daddy, the song you used to sing to Mommy." Silence fell between them. Mason stared at the paper. That song, their song, "When the Morning Comes." He hadn't sung it in years, not since they played it at Christine's memorial 3 springs ago. Just the thought of it made his chest tighten. "Bug," his voice softened. "Why would you do that?" Ellie looked up at him, suddenly serious. "Because I remember how Mommy used to close her eyes when you sang it, like it made her feel safe. And I want everyone to hear it, to know how amazing you are." Her words hit him harder than any wrench ever had. He knelt, his hands still stained with engine grime, and looked her in the eye. "Ellie, that song, it belongs to her. To us. It's not easy for me, I know," she whispered, "but maybe someone else needs to hear it too. Like Mommy did." Mason didn't answer. His throat was tight. She leaned forward, hugged him hard, and ran back out toward the house. The flyer fluttered to the floor, landing face up at his feet. The print was childish, messy Mason Rivers, vocal solo, "When the Morning Comes." That night, Mason sat on the porch with his old acoustic guitar. He hadn't touched it in months. It was dusty, the strings slightly out of tune. He strummed a chord and winced. Rough, but not beyond repair. Like him, maybe. The stars were beginning to show in the darkening sky. Ellie was inside, humming to herself as she colored. From where he sat, he could still hear her. That small, bright life he'd somehow managed to keep going when everything else had fallen apart. He thought of Christine, her laugh, her voice as she sang along with him, off-key but fearless. The way she'd cup his face when he sang that song. "It makes me feel like the world is holding its breath," she once said. Now it was just him. Holding his breath, he began to play. The first few notes were hesitant, like a man remembering how to walk after forgetting he had legs. Then it found him. The melody, the memory, the ache. "When the morning comes and the shadows fade, will you still be near me, in light or in shade?" His voice cracked, but he kept going. It wasn't for the crowd. It wasn't for pride. It was for her. And maybe, just maybe, for him too. The next day he considered backing out. He could call the school, say it was a mistake, blame work, the flu, anything. But every time he looked at Ellie and the way she smiled when he picked up the guitar again, he couldn't do it. Friday arrived like thunder. The auditorium at Willow Creek Elementary was packed. Parents, kids, teachers, and neighbors. The room buzzed with laughter, Folding chairs scraping across the tile floor, toddlers crying, someone's phone ringing. Mason stood backstage, palms sweating, heart pounding like a loose piston. He felt completely out of place. He was in his work boots, clean jeans, and a button-down shirt that had been hanging in his closet since Christine's funeral. Mr. Rivers, a young teacher, called. "You're up next." He swallowed. Right. He stepped into the lights. The stage felt too big, the crowd too loud. He scanned the room and found Ellie in the front row, her hands clasped under her chin. Her eyes locked on him, beaming with pride. Behind her, strangers. And someone else. A woman. Alone. Up on the balcony, wearing white, hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on him. He took a breath, adjusted the strap on his guitar, and began to play. The auditorium hushed almost instantly. No one expected that voice from that man. It wasn't perfect. It trembled, bled. But it was real. And as the final note faded, a single sound rose from the balcony, a quiet, unmistakable sob. The woman in white lifted her hand to her cheek. She wasn't clapping. She was crying. Mason didn't see her clearly. He bowed his head, whispered, "Thank you," and walked off stage. He never knew that someone had just been changed forever. Amelia Langford sat in her rental car parked under the pines that framed the edge of Willow Creek's elementary school. The night air was cool, the windows fogged just slightly at the corners, but she hadn't started the engine. She was still crying. Not the sobbing kind of grief that tore through her when Miles first passed. No, this was quieter. The kind of crying that snuck up on you when a memory returned, not to destroy you, but to remind you that something once mattered deeply. The voice of the man on that stage, rough around the edges, full of ache and memory, had peeled something open in her. That song, her brother had sung it just days before he died, whispered it really through parched lips. When the morning comes and the shadows fade. He had called it a song that doesn't lie. At the time, she hadn't understood what he meant. But now in this quiet parking lot, she felt it. Honesty. Loss. Hope that hadn't completely burned out. She closed her eyes and listened again in her mind. That voice. Deep. Human. Beautiful because it wasn't trying to be. The next morning, Mason was back at the garage before 8:00 a.m. wrench in hand, country radio humming faintly through an old speaker in the corner. Life, it seemed, went on whether you were ready or not. He hadn't slept much, not because of nerves, but because something felt unfinished. The performance had cracked something open in him. He wasn't sure what yet. Ellie had fallen asleep the moment they got home, still clutching the program from the show. "You did it, Daddy," she mumbled, drifting off. Mom would have smiled the whole time. Mason had watched her sleep for a long time, wondering what she saw when she dreamed, wondering if Christine ever visited her somehow. He was tightening a bolt when the bell above the garage door chimed. "Be right with you," he called, brushing his hands off on a shop towel. The woman who walked in wasn't local. That much was obvious. She wore a long beige coat over dark jeans, her brown hair pulled loosely into a clip. Elegant, effortless. Her eyes were green-gray like river stone, and something in them looked familiar, though he couldn't place it. "Morning," she said softly. Mason nodded. "Morning. What brings you by my car's been acting funny. Some kind of rattle near the back left tire. You're not from around here, are you?" She smiled politely. "No, just visiting." "All right, pull around back and I'll take a look." As Amelia waited in the small office while Mason lifted the car, she scanned the photos tacked to the corkboard near the door. Ellie as a toddler in overalls. A younger Mason, clean-shaven, holding a woman with laughing eyes and copper hair. She was gone. That much Amelia could see. People who grieved always had a certain stillness in their smiles. The picture told her enough. Mason walked in a few minutes later, wiping his hands. Nothing major. Probably just a heat shield loosened. I can fix it up quick. She nodded. Thank you. That's kind of you. He gave a modest shrug. It's what I do. There was a silence, the kind that could stretch into awkwardness or intimacy depending on what came next. You were at the school last night, she said, almost a whisper. Mason blinked. I was. You sang. He stiffened slightly, unsure if this was the beginning of a joke or a complaint. It was beautiful, she added quickly. I wasn't expecting, well, anything, but that song, it means something to me. He studied her for a moment, then gestured to the only 2 chairs in the room. You want coffee? It's terrible, but it's hot. She laughed. Perfect. They sat by the window, 2 paper cups steaming between them, surrounded by the smells of gasoline and cedar. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't polished, but it was real. What's your name? He asked. Amelia, she said, not lying but omitting. Amy, if that's easier. I'm Mason. I guess you already knew that. I figured. She took a sip, then looked out the window. The song you sang, it was my brother's favorite. He passed away this summer. He used to play it on his old record player when we were kids. And then again, right before the end. Mason's brow softened. I'm sorry. Thank you. A pause. It just caught me off guard last night, the way you sang it. It felt like hearing him again for just a moment. He nodded, silent, letting her speak, letting the words settle. Do you sing often? She asked. He gave a half smile. Not anymore. That was the first time since. He trailed off. She was your wife, Amelia guessed. He nodded. Christine. I'm sorry. Another pause. And then Mason said something he hadn't said aloud in years. She made me promise I'd keep singing after she was gone. Said it was how she fell in love with me. But when she died, I didn't want to hear my own voice anymore. It felt selfish somehow. Amelia looked at him, truly. Looked and saw what so many others missed, a man still holding a note for someone who could no longer hear it. You honored her last night, she said. And my brother, too. More than you know. Mason glanced down at his coffee, then back at her. I'm glad someone needed it. They sat in silence after that, comfortable, heavy, human. When Amelia left, Mason watched her go with a quiet curiosity tugging at the back of his mind. She hadn't told him her last name, hadn't said where she was staying. Just thanked him, smiled that distant, haunted smile, and left. He didn't know she would be back, and he certainly didn't know that her presence was about to change everything. The next few days passed with a strange sense of stillness, as though something had shifted just under the surface of Mason's quiet life. He went about his routine school drop-offs, carburetor rebuilds, late-night leftovers, but something inside him felt tuned, not louder, not brighter, just more present. He hadn't seen Amy since she drove off that morning in her silver SUV, with her eyes still holding pieces of a grief he recognized. She hadn't made another appointment, left no number. It was entirely possible that her visit was a one-time ripple in his otherwise undisturbed pond. But Mason couldn't shake her from his mind. He found himself singing softly, while working half-remembered lyrics, humming old melodies. Ellie noticed. One night while washing dishes, she smiled and said, "You always sing when you're happy, Daddy." He hadn't realized it, and he wasn't sure yet if he was happy, but maybe he was becoming whole again. Thursday afternoon, just before closing, Mason found himself staring at the flyer Ellie had pinned to the fridge. The words, "Talent Show," were underlined in pink crayon. The date was circled twice. "Are you nervous?" Ellie asked, leaning against the kitchen counter in her socks. "A little," he admitted. More nervous than when I had to pull an engine out of a moving truck. She giggled. "You're gonna be great." He smiled, but deep down, doubt twisted in his chest. Singing in the garage to one kind stranger was one thing. Standing on stage in front of an entire school full of parents and strangers, that was something else. Worse yet, part of him feared being laughed at. He wasn't young anymore, wasn't slick. He worked with his hands, wore boots scuffed from years of work, and hadn't been on a stage since college. He wondered briefly if Ellie had any idea what she'd signed him up for. Friday night came quickly. Too quickly. Mason stood in the hallway behind the auditorium, surrounded by kids with glitter-covered guitars, nervous parents fussing with costume adjustments, and folding chairs squeaking across linoleum. The school had been transformed, string lights, overhead balloons at the corners of the stage, a giant Willow Creek Shines banner across the curtain. He looked completely out of place. No one said it aloud, but he could feel the stares. Other dads wore polos and loafers. Mason wore jeans, a button-up shirt, with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and work boots. His calloused fingers gripped the neck of his old guitar like it was a life raft. Across the room, Ellie waved from the front row, grinning like he was already a star. Her faith in him was pure and unfiltered. The principal stepped up to the microphone. "Next up, we have a very special guest. Please welcome Mr. Mason Rivers." There it was. No turning back. Mason stepped out into the light. For a split second, the auditorium seemed too bright, too quiet. Then came a polite smattering of applause, curious, uncertain. Some laughter rippled from the back row. Teenagers, probably. Or maybe just adults who hadn't learned the cost of unkindness. Mason heard it, felt it, and chose not to let it stay with him. He adjusted the strap on his guitar, cleared his throat, and glanced at Ellie. She gave him 2 thumbs up. Then he looked upward toward the balcony. She was there. Amy. Amelia. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying yet. But she was watching him the way someone watches something they're not ready to lose. He took a deep breath and began to play. The first chord rang out low and warm like a heartbeat. His voice came in slow, slightly gravelly soft around the edges, but steady. He sang not as a performer, but as a man remembering something sacred. A promise. A memory. A love that time couldn't silence. When the morning comes and the shadows fade, will your love remain like a light that stayed? The room quieted. Fully. Even the toddlers stopped rustling. Mason wasn't aware of the silence. He wasn't aware of the hundreds of eyes. He wasn't even aware of the tear slipping down his own cheek. He was only aware of the music, of Ellie watching him with awe, of a woman in white sitting still and silent in the upper row, hands clenched, chest trembling. The final chord rang like a closing door, gentle and lasting. Mason exhaled, lowered his guitar. No applause came immediately, just stillness. And then from the balcony, a sound, a sharp breath, a sob. Amelia had covered her mouth, but the sound carried. Someone clapped, then another. Then the whole auditorium erupted. But Mason didn't bow. He looked at Ellie. She was crying too, but smiling. He looked to the balcony, but she was gone. Later that night back home, Mason tucked Ellie into bed. She curled up against her pillow, cheeks pink with joy. "You did it," she whispered. "You made everyone feel what Mommy felt." He kissed her forehead, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thanks to you." She blinked up at him. "Will you sing again?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I think I will." He walked back to the porch where his guitar leaned against the wall. The night was still, the sky scattered with stars. And somewhere, maybe nearby, maybe not a woman who knew that song better than he did, was trying to catch her breath. Amelia Langford didn't sleep that night. She tried. She dimmed the lights, brewed chamomile tea changed into her softest sweater, and even pulled out the old hardcover journal she used to carry before board meetings. She'd scribbled half a dozen half-thoughts, closed it, and stared at the ceiling of the rental cottage until the shadows shifted with the dawn. The song had followed her home. It hadn't just lingered in her ears. It had settled into her chest, vibrating softly against a grief she thought she had long buried. The man who sang it didn't even know she existed, and yet somehow he'd broken her in a way that didn't hurt, but healed. She had cried the way a person cries when they've been found. Miles would have smiled at that. That morning, Amelia stood barefoot on the creaking floorboards of the cottage and brewed herself a second cup of coffee. Through the window, the pines swayed in the early light. She could see the edge of Willow Creek's main street beyond the hill. Still quiet. Still small. Still untouched by the world she came from. She'd only planned to be in town for 3 days. A quiet retreat before the final distribution of Miles's estate. Her brother had loved simplicity, back roads, record shops, second-hand books, things that carried wear-like honor. That was why she chose this place. Miles had driven through once and called it the kind of town where people still bake pies because they want to. She hadn't expected to stay past Sunday. Now she wasn't sure when, or if she'd leave at all. Back in town, Mason returned to the garage Monday morning to find a familiar vehicle already waiting in the lot. A silver Range Rover. Clean. Northern license plate. Quietly expensive. He paused for a moment before walking up. Amelia stepped out dressed in jeans and a faded denim jacket, a quiet contrast to the polished elegance she wore last time. Her hair was pulled up, no makeup, and her eyes were softer, more human. "Morning," she said gently. Mason smiled, unsure if it was relief or curiosity that stirred in him. "You again?" "You sounded surprised." He shrugged. "Didn't know you'd come back." She looked down at the gravel. "Neither did I." He opened the garage bay and waved her in. "Same issue." She nodded. Rattling sounds back. Probably nothing. Could be the heat shield again, or something looser underneath. He popped the hood and started working without much small talk. She leaned against the wall, watching him in silence. After a few minutes, she asked, "Do you always sing like that?" Mason paused, glanced up from under the hood. "Like what?" "Like the world's ending and beginning in the same breath." He blinked. A slow, stunned moment passed. Then he gave a lopsided smile. "No one's ever put it quite like that." It's how it felt. He leaned back against the car, wiping his hands on a rag. "I don't sing much anymore. Used to when my wife was alive. She said it made her feel like the world paused just long enough to breathe." Amelia nodded. She sounds like she was smart. She was everything Mason said simply. Then, catching the heaviness of his own words, he cleared his throat. "Sorry, don't mean to dump all that on you." "You're not." Her voice lowered. "My brother. He loved that song. The one you sang. Played it all the time near the end. He called it his farewell anthem." Mason stilled. The garage went quiet again. "I didn't know what it meant until I heard it in your voice," she said. Like I finally understood why it meant so much to him. He didn't reply at first. Then funny how a song can do that. Travel across years, across people, and still land exactly where it's supposed to. Amelia's eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. She'd cried enough in the last 6 months to last a lifetime. Now she was learning how to feel again without crumbling. When he finished tightening the last bolt, Mason handed her the keys. "Should be good now. But if it acts up again, just bring it by." She hesitated, then asked, "Would it be okay if I did? Even if the car's fine?" He looked at her, really looked. Something passed between them, not romance, not yet, but a kind of silent understanding. Two people who had buried something precious and found a piece of it again in the most unexpected place. "You can come by whenever you want," Mason said. "I'll even make real coffee next time." She smiled. "That's a dangerous promise. I've made worse." Later that afternoon, Mason sat on the back porch, guitar in lap. Ellie was at a playdate. The sun filtered through the trees, catching dust motes in the air like gold. He strummed absent-mindedly, thinking about her. Not Christine. Amy. Amelia. Whoever she was. There was something about the way she carried her sadness, graceful, like someone who had lived with it long enough to make room for beauty again. Something about the way she listened, like silence didn't scare her, like she knew the value of a song that came from somewhere honest. He played a few bars of "When the Morning Comes," then stopped. Not because it hurt, but because he didn't need to finish it. Not yet. That evening, Amelia sat on the front steps of the cottage, a cup of mint tea in her hand, her journal in her lap. She opened to the page where she'd written one line that morning: "A song doesn't lie, but it can lead you home." Below it, she added, "And sometimes, someone sings it when you need it most." Then she closed the book and looked toward the town below. The next time Amelia returned to Mason's garage, it was raining. A light, steady drizzle hung in the air, the kind that didn't soak you all at once, but crept into your sleeves and settled into your bones. It blurred the edges of the town, softened the sidewalks, and muffled the world into a slow, gray hush. Mason was under the hood of an old Ford pickup when he heard the familiar sound of tires crunching gravel. He didn't have to look up to know who it was. Something about the quiet confidence of that engine. Or maybe it was just the part of him that had been waiting told him. He straightened, wiping his hands on a towel, as Amelia stepped out of the car, holding a paper bag in one hand and an umbrella in the other. "No rattle this time," she said before he could ask. "Just figured I'd bring lunch." Mason raised an eyebrow. "You drove all the way across town for that." "It's a very small town," she said, with a sly smile, handing him the bag. Chicken salad on rye, and a piece of peach pie. He held the bag like it was something precious. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said. "And besides, if I waited for this car to actually break again, I might be waiting a while." Mason opened the bag, the scent of herbs and warm bread rising immediately. "You trying to bribe me into a friendship?" "No," she said, brushing a raindrop from her sleeve. "Just feeding the person who reminded me that not everything that's gone is lost." They sat at the small folding table inside the garage's break room. It was hardly picturesque, an aging mini-fridge, a dented microwave, a coffee maker Mason had threatened to throw out at least 10 times. But Amelia didn't seem to mind. In fact, she looked more at ease here than Mason had ever seen her. "You don't talk like someone who works with cars," she said between bites. "I used to teach music at the community college," Mason said. "Before Ellie was born, before everything changed." Amelia leaned forward slightly. "What happened?" He hesitated, not because he didn't want to tell her, but because telling her felt different, like it would leave something open afterward. "My wife got sick when Ellie was 2. It was fast. 6 months between diagnosis and..." He paused. "I left the college to take care of her, sold the piano, paid off what we could, and opened this place. It gave me hours I could control. Gave Ellie stability, and you never went back to music." He shook his head. "I couldn't. Every time I tried, it felt empty, like I was singing into a room that wouldn't echo back." Amelia nodded slowly. "My brother was like that. He was an artist. Nothing huge, he painted small things. But after our parents died, he stopped. Said beauty felt like a lie." "What changed?" She looked down at her sandwich as if the answer had somehow hidden itself there. He did. Or maybe life softened around the edges again. One day he started painting the windows of the hospice, just birds and branches. Then finally the sunrise. Mason swallowed the lump in his throat. That's what your note meant then. About the song of kindness? She looked at him sharply, then smiled. So you kept it. It was written on the back of a flyer, he said. But yeah, it's in the drawer under my guitar picks. That made her laugh. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh freely, and he liked the way it filled the room without asking permission. The rain continued to fall gently outside, drawing slow streaks down the garage windows. For a while they didn't speak. They just sat in the quiet together, sipping the lukewarm coffee Mason had brewed with the same lack of finesse he brought to most domestic tasks. Amelia tapped a finger against her paper cup. Can I ask you something? Sure. When you sang the other night. Who were you singing to? He didn't answer right away. The question wasn't accusatory, just curious, and it deserved an honest reply. Christine, he said, but not in the way people think, not as a goodbye. I was singing for the part of her that still lives here. He tapped his chest. In me, in Ellie, in the way our home smells after baking cookies, in the songs I can finally play again. Amelia's eyes were glossy, but she didn't blink them away. Then maybe that's why it hit so hard. Because you weren't performing, you were remembering. He nodded. And maybe forgiving myself, too. Before she left, Amelia walked around the garage, her fingers brushing the edges of tools she couldn't name. On the corkboard near the door, she noticed a photo she hadn't seen before. Mason holding Ellie at about age 3, both of them covered in flour and laughter. You're a good father, she said softly. He shrugged. I try. She turned to him then. You don't have to try so hard all the time, you know. Sometimes just showing up is the miracle. That stopped him. No one had ever said that to him, not even Christine. And for a brief moment, something in his chest loosened, like a string finally tuned just right. When she was gone, Mason stood at the open door, watching her SUV disappear down the road, a trail of rain mist curling in her wake. He didn't know who she was, really. Still didn't know her last name, or what brought her to town. She was like a melody he hadn't yet learned, but one that already felt familiar. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was standing still. He felt like something had started moving again. The first real cold snap of October crept into Willow Creek like a whisper. By morning, frost traced lace-like patterns along porch railings, and Mason had to scrape a thin sheet of ice from his windshield before driving Ellie to school. She chattered happily in the passenger seat, feet swinging in her boots, oblivious to the way seasons marked time in her father's heart. For Mason, fall wasn't just a change in weather, it was a return to absence. Christine had passed in October, 3 years ago. Same week as the Harvest Festival. Same scent of wood smoke and cider. Same sound of brittle leaves crunching under boots. Even the crispness in the air felt like it remembered. But this year, something felt different. Lighter. Maybe it was Ellie's laughter. Maybe it was Amelia's quiet return. Or maybe it was just the simple act of singing again, even if only once. That afternoon, Amelia arrived at the garage with no pretense, no excuse about her car. Just a smile and a brown paper bag, with 2 muffins inside cranberry orange. I figured your coffee situation could use a companion, she said, holding out the bag. Mason chuckled. You're not wrong. He made fresh coffee strong but decent, and they sat again in the back room as if it were routine. And maybe it was becoming just that. Something unspoken and gentle. A ritual stitched from grief and grace. Ellie was at a friend's house for the afternoon. The space felt quieter without her, but not empty. Amelia took off her coat and sat cross-legged in one of the folding chairs, looking more like someone who belonged than someone passing through. You're staying longer than you planned, Mason noted. She nodded, sipping from her cup. I extended the rental. I didn't feel quite ready to leave. He wanted to ask why. He didn't. Instead, he let her linger in the silence, knowing some things need space to find their way out. Amelia tapped her thumb against the side of her cup. Have you ever felt like you were supposed to find something, but didn't know what it was, until much later? Mason raised an eyebrow. That's an awfully philosophical question for a Thursday. She smiled. Just answer it. He leaned back. Yeah. When Christine and I first met, I thought she was too good for me. I didn't know I was looking for her until she was standing in front of me holding jumper cables and a library book. Amelia laughed. That's oddly specific. She stalled her car in a parking lot. I fixed it. She asked if I liked poetry. What did you say I said? Only if it rhymes. He paused. She married me anyway. They both laughed, but there was something wistful in Amelia's expression now, like she'd caught a memory mid-flight and didn't want to let it go. I left something behind once, she said, voice softer. A note. I wrote it when my brother was in hospice. Just a few lines from that song, When the Morning Comes. I folded it and left it under his pillow after one of our last visits. When I came back, it was gone. Mason's chest tightened. She didn't notice his shift. She was staring into her coffee now, as if the swirl of cream and caffeine held the shape of her loss. I always wondered what happened to it, she murmured. It wasn't important, not really. But it mattered to me. Mason cleared his throat, suddenly aware of the drawer behind him. The small wooden box beneath the countertop. The one where he kept stray picks, broken strings, old tuner batteries. And a flyer. A wrinkled, smudged flyer from the talent show. With words on the back. Words that didn't belong to him. Words he hadn't recognized. Until now. That evening, after Amelia left, Mason waited until the garage was closed and the lights were off. Then he opened the drawer. He pulled out the flyer and flipped it over. The ink had faded slightly, but the handwriting was neat. Deliberate, pressed into the page like the writer had needed it to last. Some songs don't ask to be sung, they wait to be needed. When the morning comes, I will still be listening for you. He sat in the dim light for a long time, reading it again and again. It wasn't a coincidence. The flyer had been tucked under one of the chairs after the talent show. He'd assumed it had fallen from Ellie's school bag. She often drew or scribbled during rehearsals. He'd meant to throw it away, but something stopped him. And now he knew why. That night, Mason didn't sleep. He lay awake in the quiet of the house, listening to the wind against the windows, the tick of the hallway clock, and Ellie's soft breathing from the next room. His thoughts were with Amelia. Not in the romantic way people often assume when two lost souls find each other, but in the reverent, almost sacred awareness that sometimes life ties threads between strangers long before they meet. He thought about how Amelia looked when she talked about her brother, like the words were made of glass. He thought about the way she had listened to his music without judgment, without pity, just presence. And he thought about the note, how it had made its way to him, not in a letter, not by design, but like a message in a bottle drifting until the right hands opened it. In the morning, he slipped the flyer into a clean envelope, wrote Goucher, her name Amelia, across the front and placed it in the glove box of his truck. He wasn't ready to give it to her yet, but he would be. When the moment came, the next week settled into a rhythm neither Mason nor Amelia acknowledged aloud. She began stopping by the garage every few days sometimes, with coffee, sometimes with lunch, sometimes with nothing at all. It was never planned, never spoken of in advance, but Mason found himself expecting her, the way you expect the sunrise quietly, with a sense of something right returning. And she always came. Ellie, ever perceptive, noticed. One afternoon while they were folding laundry, she glanced up from a mismatched pile of socks and asked, "Are you going to marry her?" Mason nearly dropped the basket. "What, Ms. Amy? You smile more when she's around." and she laughs at your terrible jokes." He blinked, flustered. "First of all, my jokes are top tier. Second, it's not like that." Ellie shrugged, wise beyond her years. "Okay, but if it ever is, I think Mom would be okay with it." The words struck him still. He looked down at her, this small human, who carried her mother's spark and her own fire, and wondered how she could say something so profound, so effortlessly. "Thanks, Bug," he said quietly. Then, to change the subject, he picked up a sock and tossed it playfully at her head. She shrieked with laughter, and the moment passed, but it had already planted something deep in him. 2 days later, Amelia showed up just after noon, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and a paper bag in her hand. "No food today," she said, placing the bag on the counter. "Just this." Mason opened it. Slowly, eyebrows raised. Inside was a harmonica. He pulled it out with a kind of reverence, running his thumb across the worn brass edges. "This yours," it was Miles's, Amelia said. "He used to play it while painting. Badly, I should add." Mason smiled. "I doubt that. He would have loved your garage." Said music and sawdust were the two most honest smells in the world. He turned the harmonica over, examining the etchings on the side. "You sure you want to part with this?" She nodded. "I'd like it to be somewhere it's used, not just sitting in a drawer." He looked at her, something unsaid building in his chest. "Thank you." They didn't say more, but that moment, quiet, unadorned, spoke volumes. In the language of loss and gestures, they were growing fluent with one another. Later that afternoon, after he closed the shop, Mason took the harmonica outside to the back porch behind the garage. It was chilly, and his breath fogged in the air, but he didn't notice. He played. Not well. Not confidently. Just enough to let a note out into the sky. Then another. Then a phrase that wasn't quite a melody, but had the shape of something becoming one. And when he finally set it down, he felt lighter, like he'd given something back. That evening, Amelia joined him for dinner. Ellie had invited her, without telling him. She said yes. Ellie called through the kitchen before he could object. "She's bringing dessert." Mason had barely managed a grumble before Amelia knocked on the door, holding a warm container of apple crisp. They ate by candlelight, not by design, but because the overhead light in the dining room had finally given out, and Mason hadn't had time to fix it. Amelia laughed when she saw the mismatched plates and slightly burned roast chicken. "I didn't realize dinner came with ambiance," she teased. He gave a sheepish shrug. "We're rustic." But it worked. Ellie regaled Amelia with stories from school, complete with dramatic reenactments and wide-eyed expressions. Amelia responded like someone who didn't just tolerate children, but genuinely enjoyed them. She asked questions, laughed in the right places, and listened, really listened. Mason watched them from across the table, something warm curling in his chest. This wasn't the life he'd imagined 3 years ago, but in that moment, it felt fuller than anything he'd thought possible since Christine passed. After Ellie went to bed, Mason walked Amelia to her car beneath a sky full of winter stars. They stood by the driver's side door, hands tucked into their coats, breath visible in the cold. "I meant to ask," she said. "Have you written anything new lately?" He raised an eyebrow. "Songs, He hesitated. A few lines. Nothing finished. "Can I hear some?" He shook his head, embarrassed. "They're just ideas. Scraps." "I like scraps," she said softly. "Sometimes they say more than polished things do." He looked at her, really looked, and saw the quiet weight she carried. Not just grief, but also gentleness, a willingness to stay present. And something stirred in him deeper than attraction, more patient than longing. He wanted to tell her about the note, The one she had written, the one he'd found. But it didn't feel like the right night. Not yet. So instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A lyric, scribbled a few days ago, inspired by her, though he hadn't admitted it even to himself. He handed it to her. She opened it and read. She walked in like a whisper, and I forgot I'd stopped listening. Now her silence is louder than all my old songs. She looked up. Mason shrugged, suddenly shy. Like I said, just scraps. Amelia folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her coat. Then you've never seen how paper holds fire. She kissed his cheek. Not dramatic, not lingering, just real. Then she got in the car and drove away, leaving Mason standing in the quiet, the stars overhead, and something bright and burning quietly inside him. It had been 4 days since Amelia last came by. Not that Mason was keeping track, at least not out loud. But he noticed the days stack one atop another, and with each her absence echoed louder in the quiet rhythm of his life. He hadn't seen her SUV glide into the lot. No familiar knock at the side door. No paper bag with lunch or harmonica jokes or folded scraps of lyric tucked into coat pockets. Gone. Just like that. At first he told himself she'd gotten busy. She was probably tying up whatever business had brought her to town. Maybe visiting family. Or maybe he feared quietly she had realized she didn't belong in this dusty garage, in this small town, with a man still piecing together his past. That fear sat heavy in him. He didn't share it with Ellie. She had asked about Amelia only once. Is Miss Amy coming over again soon? I'm not sure. Bug, he'd said. Okay, Ellie replied softly, before retreating to her room, dragging a half-finished drawing behind her, like it had suddenly lost its color. On the 5th day, just after sunset, Mason walked into the garage's break room and found an envelope on the table. No return address, just Mason in looping script. He stood staring at it for a long time before picking it up. Palms slightly damp. The envelope was heavy not just with paper, but with weight, meaning something unspoken. He opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph, black and white, slightly creased. A young man, handsome, thin, with a brush in one hand and a half-finished painting in the other. Behind him, a window with morning light streaming through and across the glass. A faint painting of a rising sun. Miles, Amelia's brother. On the back of the photo, in neat handwriting, this was the last thing he painted. He called it "Still Listening." Underneath the photo was a short note. Mason, I didn't plan to stay this long. I came here to let go of something. I didn't expect to find a reason to hold on again. But sometimes, things are too big for us to process all at once. The way grief folds into love. The way music revives memory. The way you made something broken feel safe again. Thank you for letting me remember him without guilt. And thank you for singing when you didn't have to. I've gone back to finish what needs finishing. But I promise, this isn't goodbye. I just need a little time. Amelia, he read it once, then again. Then he sat down, elbows on the table, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding since the day she disappeared. That night, he brought the photo home and placed it on the mantel next to Christine's. Not to replace anything, but to recognize something new. Something beginning. He told Ellie the truth. She had to go take care of something important. But she said it's not goodbye. Ellie blinked up at him from where she sat, cross-legged on the living room rug. Are we going to wait for her? He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, Bug. We'll wait. The following days were quieter, but not empty. Mason found himself playing music again, not out of obligation, but instinct. He picked up the guitar each evening, not always to practice, but to feel, to stay connected, to remember that music had returned to him not as a performance, but as a thread tying past to present. He wrote lyrics in the evenings, He and Ellie started a new routine: dinner at the table, with music playing in the background, then quiet hour where he played, and she drew or read. One night, she handed him a folded paper and said, "This is for your next song." It was a crayon drawing of a guitar under a sky full of stars, and in a child's wobbly handwriting at the bottom, "When someone sings from the heart, it never really stops." He tucked it into the same drawer where he'd once stored Amelia's forgotten note. A week later, Mason stood on the back porch, twilight wrapped around the edges of the yard. A chill kissed the air, the kind that told you fall was giving way to winter. He had his guitar in hand and Amelia's harmonica resting on the railing beside him. He didn't play. Not yet. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the envelope, the one he had prepared days ago with her original note tucked neatly inside. He'd written only one sentence on the back before sealing it. Some notes travel far, but they always find their way home. He didn't know when she'd return, or if, but something in him believed she would, because some songs weren't written to end, only to pause just long enough for the next verse to arrive. November arrived like a whisper. The wind turned colder, the leaves thinner, and the days clipped shorter at both ends. In Willow Creek, porch lights went on earlier, and the sound of rakes scraping across lawns became the rhythm of dusk. But in the Rivers household, something else was stirring. Ellie had taken to humming. It started one morning over breakfast, soft, tuneless at first, but with a lilt Mason recognized. He didn't say anything, just watched her spoon in one hand, head bobbing to her own silent concert as she spooned cereal into her mouth. That night, he heard her again singing in the bathroom as she brushed her teeth. A few notes, then a full line, then laughter. Mason stood outside the door, hand resting on the frame, listening not to the melody, but to the way joy was sneaking back into his daughter's voice. He hadn't heard that in a long time. A few days later, Ellie came home from school with a pink flyer clutched in her mittened hand. "Daddy," she said breathlessly. "Ms. Rowan is organizing a community music night. It's at the church hall. They're letting anyone sign up, not just students." Mason raised an eyebrow. "And I assume you're thinking what I think you're thinking." She grinned. "You should do it. I already sang once this year. That's more than enough stage time for me." "But this one's different," she pressed. "It's not fancy. It's just people singing because they want to." He smiled at her choice of words. "Please," she added, folding her hands together. "It could be your second first time." He laughed. "Your logic is alarming." But persuasive, he leaned back, considering. "Tell you what. If you sing with me, I'll do it." Her eyes widened. "Really? Really? You pick the song." She paused for a moment, then whispered, "I want to do the one you wrote. The one about the stars." Mason blinked. "You read that? You left your notebook open?" She shrugged. "Besides, it was beautiful, and I already know half the words." He looked at her, a quiet awe settling over him. "You surprise me, Bug," she beamed. "That's my job." Over the next week, their evenings were filled with practice. At first it was awkward. Ellie missing notes, Mason fumbling chords. But slowly, something magic emerged from their imperfections. He adjusted the key to her voice, softened the melody, trimmed the lyrics to make room for her bright, clear tones. The song, tentatively titled "Where the Light Still Lives," took shape like something that had been waiting for them to find it together. Every night, Ellie insisted on recording their rehearsals on an old phone. She'd press play afterward, listening with the same reverence she once gave bedtime stories. "It sounds like us," she said one night, curled beside him on the couch. "It is us," he replied, brushing a curl from her forehead. "Every note." 2 nights before the community concert, Mason stepped outside for some air. The stars were sharp in the cold sky, stitched like tiny lanterns across a blanket of dark velvet. He leaned on the porch, railing guitar in one hand, Amelia's harmonica in the other. Still no word. No call. No letter. No unexpected car pulling into the gravel lot. But he no longer filled her absence with worry. Not like before. Instead, he filled it with sound, with music, with his daughter's laughter, with small, honest moments that she had reminded him were still worth holding on to. He missed Amelia, yes. But more than that, he believed in her return, not from a place of longing, but because the space she left wasn't empty. It was still resonating like the echo of a note that promised a chorus would follow. The night of the concert arrived with the scent of cinnamon and pine in the air. The church fellowship hall had been dressed up with string lights and folding chairs, a makeshift stage framed by pumpkins, and knit scarves draped across the podium. Mason tuned his guitar in the corner, while Ellie adjusted her scarf in the mirror. She looked so grown up in that moment, hair braided neatly, eyes bright with anticipation. She held her lyric sheet like it was a ticket to something magical. "You nervous?" he asked. A little, she admitted. "Me too." She looked up at him, then whispered, "Do you think she'll come?" He didn't ask who she meant. He just smiled. "I don't know. But I think she'd be proud either way." They stepped on stage together. The crowd was modest. Neighbors, classmates, retirees, and toddlers with sticky hands and oversized sweaters. Mason scanned the faces out of habit. She wasn't there. But somehow, she was. In the way the air felt warm despite the draft. In the way Ellie stood tall beside him. In the way the room hushed the moment they began to play. We may not know where the river bends, but the stars above still guide the ends. And in this song, we'll find again, where the light still lives. Their voices blended his warm and grounding hers, clear and earnest. A harmony built not on pitch, but on love. When they finished, the room applauded, warm and generous, not wild, but full of heart. And in the back row, just for a second, he thought he saw her, a woman in white, standing still, hands clasped. But when he looked again, she was gone. Or maybe she was simply already a part of the song. 3 mornings had passed since the community concert, and the photograph of Mason and Ellie on stage had already claimed its place on the refrigerator door, pinned between a grocery list and a watercolor turkey Ellie had made in school. She'd drawn Amelia in the background, a tiny figure just barely visible in the back row, shaded softly in colored pencil. When Mason asked her about it, Ellie simply said, "She was there. I just know it." He didn't argue. Something in him wanted to believe it too. And then on a Friday afternoon, as golden light slanted through the bay window of the garage office, Mason heard the soft crunch of tires on gravel. He wiped his hands on a shop towel and stepped out, heart tapping a quiet rhythm in his chest. There she was, Amelia. Same coat, same wind-blown hair. But something in her face had changed, like a door had been closed gently behind her, and she was finally standing in the room again. "I didn't call," she said, her voice husky from the cold, or maybe nerves. "You didn't need to," Mason replied. They stood there for a moment, the autumn wind picking up around them. Then he stepped aside and gestured toward the garage. "I made coffee," he said. "Still not great, but hot." She smiled and walked in. Inside, it was as though no time had passed. She sat in the same folding chair, cupped the same chipped mug, and studied the same pegboard of tools like it was a painting in a gallery. But beneath the surface, a current ran strong. "I needed to go back," she said after a while, "to settle some things, legal and emotional." Mason nodded. "I figured. I visited Miles's old studio, packed it up, donated most of it to the hospice, kept a few pieces. The sunrise window. It's still there. They put a little plaque under it. Said it helps the patient sleep better. That's beautiful, he murmured. She met his gaze. You helped me remember why he mattered. Why I matter. That's not something I can repay. He shook his head. You don't owe me anything. I brought something anyway, she said, reaching into her bag. She handed him a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was a framed photo one he hadn't seen before. It was Christine, laughing, in color, vibrant, candid. Her head thrown back, mid-laugh, flour dusted on her nose. Mason's arms were around her waist, frozen in a moment of pure joy. He stared at it for a long time. Ellie showed me the original, Amelia said. I asked if I could scan it. I just wanted to give it back to you. Clearer. Mason blinked, his throat tightening. Thank you, she hesitated. There's something else. He reached into the drawer beneath the counter before she could say more, pulled out the envelope, held it out to her. She froze. You found it. It was under one of the chairs after the talent show, he said. I kept it. Didn't know why. Until you started talking about your brother. Amelia took the envelope with trembling hands, her eyes glistening. I read those words when I needed them most, Mason said. I thought they were meant for me. And maybe in some strange way, they were. She opened the envelope, slowly rereading the note, her breath catching as her fingers traced her own handwriting. I thought it was gone, she whispered. And somehow, it found its way back. Through you. Their eyes met. There were no fireworks, no music swelling in the background, just two people sitting in a garage, surrounded by grease-stained tools and echoes of grief, quietly recognizing that some losses don't take everything. Some leave room for something new. Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped lower. I heard about the concert, Amelia said after a while. Ellie sent me the recording. Mason chuckled. She's got a sneaky streak. She's got a heart the size of Texas. He looked at her then more directly than he had in weeks. You were there, weren't you? Amelia didn't answer right away. Then she nodded. Just for a minute. I sat in the back. I was afraid if I stayed, I'd interrupt something that didn't need me. You were wrong. Silence followed. Not awkward. Not heavy. Just real. Then slowly she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small slip of paper, the same one Mason had given her before she left. She unfolded it, read it aloud. She walked in like a whisper, and I forgot I'd stopped listening. Now her silence is louder than all my old songs. She folded it again and placed it on the table. Do you know what that felt like? Mason? He looked at her, unsure, like someone saw me, not the version I show to clients or friends or the press. Just me. The girl who lost too much too early and forgot how to breathe without holding her breath. I saw what was already there, he said gently. You just needed someone to sing it back to you. Amelia stood, walked to where he was seated, and sat beside him. No barriers. No masks. I don't know what happens next, she said. Neither do I, he replied. But I know you're not leaving tonight. She laughed softly. No, not tonight. Then she leaned in and kissed him, soft, honest, and unhurried. And for the first time since Christine's death, Mason didn't feel guilt for smiling into someone else's touch. It wasn't replacement. It was continuation. That night after dinner, Ellie curled up beside them on the couch, holding Amelia's hand like she'd always been part of the picture. The house felt full again, not of noise or busyness, but of something better. Presence. Outside, the wind carried the last of the leaves down the street, and in the living room, Mason picked up his guitar and began to play. This time, the melody didn't ache. It belonged here now. The first snow came early that year. It wasn't much, just a soft dusting that settled over the rooftops and blanketed the town in hush. The kind of snow that made the world feel gentler, as if it too was holding its breath. Mason stood on the porch, mug of coffee in one hand, Ellie's scarf slung over his shoulder. Inside, she was hunting for her boots, while Amelia reheated pancakes and hummed to herself. From where he stood, he could hear them both. Laughter, footsteps, the scrape of a spatula. It was a sound he had forgotten he missed until it returned. Not loudly, not dramatically, just like that first note of a favorite song. Later that morning, they drove into town together. Amelia had offered to help set up chairs at the community center, where a small holiday concert was being planned. Ellie was singing with her school choir. Mason was bringing his guitar, not as a headliner, just as backup, which suited him just fine. The fellowship hall was abuzz with the kind of cheerful chaos Mason had come to love. Paper snowflakes taped to walls, children running underfoot, someone tuning an out-of-key piano in the corner. Same stage as last time, Ellie whispered to him, pointing to the small platform near the windows. But this time, it's brighter. He nodded. Maybe because you are. She rolled her eyes playfully, then dashed off to join her classmates. Mason set his guitar case down and took a moment to look around. So much had changed, and yet nothing essential had. The folding chairs were still mismatched. The lights still flickered when the heater kicked in. The piano still wavered on its higher notes. But he was different now. He had started singing again, not just in sound, but in spirit. After rehearsal, Mason and Amelia took a walk through town. The streets were quiet, dusted with snow, and the shop windows glowed with early holiday lights. They passed the bookstore Miles had once mentioned. He had sketched its storefront in a journal Amelia still kept in her suitcase. She paused in front of it, tracing the frost on the glass. "Do you think memories can live in places?" she asked. "I think they wait for us," Mason said, "until we're ready to carry them forward." She looked at him, eyes soft. "I think you might be right." That evening, as twilight fell, Mason found himself back at the garage, not to work, but to retrieve something. He opened the bottom drawer behind the counter and pulled out a small, worn envelope. Inside it, the note Amelia had written. The same one that had once felt like a whisper from somewhere holy. He turned it over, added one more line in his own hand. "And when the morning comes, we'll sing it together." He folded it again and slipped it into his coat. That night, they gathered on the porch. It had become a ritual now, guitar harmonica sometimes, just the three of them sitting in the dark, listening to nothing in particular. But tonight, Mason felt the moment ask for more. He strummed softly the chords familiar and began to sing. Amelia joined in quietly on the second verse, her voice not perfect, but deeply present. Ellie hummed along, her head resting on Amelia's shoulder. "When the morning comes and the shadows fade, will you still be near me, in the light we've made?" Mason's voice trembled just slightly, not from sorrow this time, but from gratitude so deep it had nowhere else to go but upward. He looked to his left, Amelia's eyes closed, smiling as she sang. He looked to his right, Ellie finally asleep, fingers curled in comfort. And in that moment, he knew this was the chorus, the verse they had all been waiting for. Not an ending, never an ending. Just the part of the song where everyone starts singing together. Weeks later, the first real snowstorm hit, and school was canceled. Mason came home early to find Amelia and Ellie in the kitchen, attempting a new cookie recipe, with more flour on the floor than in the bowl. Amelia turned, white dust streaked across her cheek. "We may not be bakers." Mason kissed the tip of her nose. "But we're trying." That night, while Ellie slept, and the house settled into its winter hush, Amelia pulled out an envelope from her coat and handed it to him. He opened it slowly. Inside was a photo new this time, the three of them, sitting on the porch, guitar resting between them, eyes bright. The caption in Amelia's handwriting. When the morning came, he was still singing, and we were finally listening. In the end, Mason never sang on a big stage again. He didn't need to. His stage was a garage, a porch, a living room filled with light and second chances, and his greatest audience. A woman who once wrote to a brother lost to silence and found a man who taught her how to sing again. A daughter who believed in him even when he didn't. And a town that listened not because he was perfect, but because he was honest. And when the morning came, they were still there, still singing, together. If this story touched something in your heart, I'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Leave a comment and share a little piece of your world with us. It's amazing how stories connect people from places we've never even been. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, quiet, honest, and full of hope, feel free to subscribe. We'd be honored to have you here. Thank you truly for spending your time with me today. It means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep holding space for kindness.